This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and today I'm joined by Charlie Gerow, who is President and CEO of
Quantum Communications here in beautiful Harrisburg, PA.
And tell us a little bit, Charlie, about Quantum Communications.
Well, Quantum Communications has been around for about 20 years, Charlie, the premier public affairs and public relations group here in Harrisburg. We have offices in suburban Annapolis and in New York City, as well as here in Harrisburg, and we do issue advocacy for right-of-center issues.
Well, you have grown exponentially, and your influence has spread around the eastern seaboard and across the nation in a way that perhaps you never saw when you started the organization.
Well, you're very kind, Charlie. I hope that's true.
No, your name is mentioned in Washington, D.C. frequently, and you know that in a good way. No, it's nice of you to come today. Today we're going to talk about the Pennsylvania elections. We're going to talk, first of all, about the gubernatorial debate that was held the other day. We had one debate, Charlie, between the gubernatorial candidates. Why don't you give the viewers a quick overview of the two tickets, and then we'll talk about the debate.
Well, real quickly, it was billed as the one debate, but it really wasn't a debate at all, Charlie. It was actually billed as a conversation between Tom Wolf and Scott Wagner, because Tom Wolf has agreed to only do one debate this time around. Ordinarily, there are at least three. Historically, that's been the model for Pennsylvanians, and it's given voters an opportunity to see the candidates up close, side by side, unvarnished, and not through 30-second spots. This year, Charlie, the two candidates could not be any further apart in style, in personality, and in their views on the issues, but unfortunately, voters aren't going to get a chance to see that because there doesn't look, at this point anyway, like there's going to be any more debate, and Monday night was not a debate. It was a debacle.
Well, as you said, traditionally, we've had three debates between the gubernatorial candidates. Scott Wagner, the Republican candidate, he's offered to do 67 debates in all 67 counties. That would be
Richard Nixon in 1960.
Visiting all the 50 states, although he didn't have 50 debates.
Right.
But yeah, so do you think there's the possibility that there might be one more debate?
I think there's the possibility now, because I think the pressure is really going to be put on Tom Wolf to say yes to at least one more and maybe two, because unfortunately Monday night, a debate which, as I said, was really billed as a quote-unquote conversation between the two candidates, hosted by a television game show host, Alex Trebek, who bluntly did a miserable job and who interjected himself in the discussion way too much, talking more than either of the candidates, so that the candidates didn't really get a chance to be heard from in any meaningful way.
Okay, the gubernatorial debate the other day was put on by the Pennsylvania State Chamber of Business and Industry, and the host was Alex Trebek. It was at the Hershey Motor Lodge. Why Alex Trebek? How did he enter the world of Pennsylvania politics, Charlie?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, he obviously was paid a lot of money, purportedly $50,000 to come. It was pretty clear to me that they wanted the star power of Alex Trebek. We live in a celebrity-driven culture, unfortunately, but it was fundamentally an error to have him as the moderator of the debate. He'd never done it before, and he came well prepared. He had every fact you could possibly imagine about Pennsylvania government and politics, but sometimes, Charlie, as you know, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and he kept interjecting himself into the discussion. He said at the beginning of the thing that it wasn't going to be about him, but he turned it into himself too many times.
Is it fair to say the audience didn't come, both the audience at the Hershey Motor Lodge or the viewing audience, they didn't come to hear his views on the issues, Charlie?
Exactly. And I mean, he sounded at times like he was a candidate himself, arguing with both Scott Wagner, especially with Scott Wagner, to be very blunt, and also with Tom Wolf. But he didn't understand the audience, Charlie. He came at the end in support of an additional severance tax on natural gas in front of an audience of natural gas developers, midstream distributors, etc. He ended up getting booed by the chamber's audience. That says a lot.
Mm-hmm. And during the course of the debate, isn't it true that Scott Wagner took a moment when we were talking again about the number of debates, and he recognized former Governor Tom Corbett, who was in the audience, and said and gave him credit for at least being willing, as the incumbent governor, to debate Tom Wolf, who was the challenger at that time, 3 times.
He did. I mean, for poor Scott Wagner, he had to score some points Monday night, and he didn't get an opportunity to, through no fault of his own. I mean, he just was shut out of the time. His closing was very strong, and he realized at that point that there was nothing Trebek could do to rein him back in, so his closing was very strong. But had he, a la Ronald Reagan in 1980 up in New Hampshire, grabbed that microphone and said, Mr. Trebek, this is a serious debate between 2 serious candidates running for the highest elective office in this land, or in this state anyway, and we're going to have a real discussion about the policy differences between the 2 of us right now because your time is over. I think he'd have gotten a standing ovation from the audience, and the folks at home would have had the opportunity to see a real debate.
Mm-hmm. Did this debate take any questions from the viewing audience?
No,
it was telecast by Pennsylvania Cable Network, which does that frequently.
Yeah, it was televised by the Pennsylvania Cable Network, but the questions were all Mr. Trebek's own, and it really was just a very awkward evening, and I think both sides left grousing and griping about the job that Alex Trebek did.
Okay, tell us what the differences, the policy differences are between the 2 candidates, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I think most important are the issues of taxation and of regulation. Tom Wolf has clearly stated that he wants to raise the taxes of every single Pennsylvanian, and his wanderlust is over an additional, underline additional, tax on the safe and responsible development of natural gas in this state, something that would have a very negative effect on an industry that has done so much for so many. And the other issue is with respect to regulation, because regulation, as you know, Dr. Greenewalt, is a tax in and of itself. And Scott Wagner wants to see a more sensible, results-driven regulatory policy rather than a punitive, pile-on business and job creators regulatory scheme.
Mm-hmm. Did talk about the severance tax. What was the difference there?
Well, Pennsylvania already has a tax on natural gas. We call it an impact fee, but in point of fact, it is a tax. Tom Wolf and some of the Democrats would like to add an additional severance tax to that. Some other states have a severance tax, but many of those states don't have the highest corporate net income tax in the country, which Pennsylvania either runs first or second to, depending on how you divine it. And most of those states don't have all of the layer of intermediate taxes that Pennsylvanians pay. So the natural gas industry is paying tons of taxes in Pennsylvania already. Tom Wolf would like them to pay more, but more importantly, he'd like everybody to pay more taxes. That was his, driving force behind his first gubernatorial campaign. Every budget that he came out with, except for his election year budget, asked for the opportunity to dig deeper into the pockets of Pennsylvania's wage earners and taxpayers. The legislature wisely has held him at bay and not allowed him to do that.
How do Wolf and Wagner disagree or agree on education and educational issues, Charlie?
Tom Wolf's plan is to simply spend more money. He has criticized over and over and over again the Corbett administration. One of the things that Scott Wagner pointed out correctly, which had spent more money, state money, than any administration in the history of the Commonwealth on education. And Wolf's plan is just basically to tax more and spend more. Wagner's plan is much more about accountability and results and looking at the end product rather than how much money you're pouring into it.
Scott Wagner was able to point out the what some people consider the lie that Tom Wolf used to win the last gubernatorial election about how Tom Corbett had cut out $1 billion from education. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Well, it was one of the great lies of the last 10 or 15 years in Pennsylvania's political life, and unfortunately they got away with it. They drove this message that Tom Corbett somehow cut $1 billion in education funding. Well, that $1 billion was phony federal stimulus money that Ed Rendell, knowing full well what he was doing, put into education, knowing that it was going to disappear in a year, and knowing that the successor to his administration was going to be the bag, as it were. And then he and the Democratic strategists around the state drove this message that it was Tom Corbett that eliminated it. It wasn't at all. That was simply not the case. And in point of fact, Corbett had increased state funding to education.
And shame on school administrators. They should know by now that any one-time money should be spent for capital projects and not for continuing programs.
Right, and they were all told that, and they understood if they looked even 1 second at the thing that the stimulus money was precisely, as you say, Doctor, for capital projects, not for ongoing programs and hiring staff.
Okay. Moving on to the Senate race for a minute. What's going on with the Senate race between Barletta and Casey? How do you size that up in our last minute and a half?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been kind of a sleepy race thus far. And Lou Barletta had to really go after Bob Casey hammer and tongue. I don't think that he's effectively done that yet. He's got 4 weeks yet to go. He changed his campaign management team a little bit ago, and I think they get it. I think you'll begin to see that shift a little bit, and I think the discussion will become about two things. One, the record of Bob Casey and what he hasn't done, because there are no signature items of Bob Casey after 12 years in the Senate that he can point to. And two, the hard left turn that he's made over the course of the past couple of years. I mean, he was an acolyte for the Obama administration, and now he's simply Donald Trump's worst critic. But in terms of accomplishment, he's got precious little to show for it. And in terms of voting record, he has a very, very liberal voting record. But a lot of people still see him as a relatively moderate centrist Democrat. I think you'll see Lou Barletta pointing out the fact that he's not that at all.
Well, in the last 45 seconds, some are surprised that here his father's foremost issue was being pro-life, a pro-life Catholic. And I always thought that that's what the senator was until he went to Washington. And all of a sudden, he became pro-choice. Is he being untrue to the legacy of his father?
He certainly is being untrue to the legacy of his father. He throws an occasional vote the pro-life way, as you know, one just recently, but his record on balance is very, very pro-choice. And he stood up for funding for Planned Parenthood and other things that make folks that believe in the sanctity of life their skin crawl.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much for joining us today. We have a lot more to talk about. We didn't even get to talk about the running mates, Fetterman versus Bartos. That's an interesting comparison.
It sure is. That'll be a fun discussion for another day, Charlie.
Yeah. Are they going to have a debate?
They're having a debate Saturday night. That will be fun to watch. John Fetterman, the 6'8" socialist, against Jeff Bartos, businessman from Montgomery County. Both good guys, by the way, but very, very disparate.
Will you be providing commentary on that?
I will.
Okay, well, watch for that. And we'll see you in the second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Behind the Headlines is also brought to you by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. On this segment, I'm joined by Mr. Ed Arnold, who is the president of Susquehanna Valley Center. Ed, welcome back.
Good to see you, Charlie.
It's nice to have you for a new Arnold report, and we have a new list of questions from around the Commonwealth from our viewers who would like your expertise and your experience with some of these topics, if you'd be so kind. And again, if you have topics and questions you want to pose for Mr. Arnold, please be sure to send them. The email address is at the bottom of the screen. And you can use that and send the questions to us. And we'll send them to, we'll make sure that Mr. Arnold gets them. Well, we have 7 questions to start with today, Mr. Arnold.
Very good.
Number 1, this is something that lots of families engage in, timeshares. This person wants to know what the future of timeshares is. And they write, my family wants me to buy one close to theirs, but I'm uncertain whether this is a good investment or not. What would you have to say about timeshares as an investment?
First of all, timeshares as an investment per se, if you look at it, will it appreciate in value? The answer is no. It is not an investment in that. It is an investment in your vacation time. If you intend to take vacation a week at a time and you want to go different places, or you want to go to the same place over and over again, it's a less expensive way to do it. However, and it has the ability through Interval International, which you have to pay for, but it's not that much, where you could swap your time in, let's say, Hilton Head for time in Portugal or in Paris or in New England or wherever. There's a giant thick book of all the different places you can swap. It's got to be available, of course, the time and so on. But basically, if you like that arrangement, and you're going to do this each year, a week here, a week there, whatever, or the same week over and over, it's less expensive than if you were just going to go and get a hotel, because first of all, it's an apartment. So it's what you need. But don't look at them. You cannot resell them. When you do resell them, you will lose most of your investment.
Mm-hmm. So have you ever had a timeshare?
Yes, I have used timeshares. I've swapped them. I went to Portugal, which worked out extremely well. I went to Paris with it, and I've swapped in some other places in the United States.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, second question for you. What do you think of biotechnology investments? And which ones, if any, would you want to recommend? And there, I know you're going to say something about that second part of the question. But what do you think of biotechnology as an investment at this point?
Biotechnology basically is a category that I just looked up a whole bunch of ETFs. And overall...
Now, what is an ETF for?
Exchange Traded Fund. Okay. Somebody that invests for you at a lower cost, because it's a whole category. And overall, they've appreciated in the last 9 months this year, anywhere from around 12% to minus 12%.
Oh,
so really
12% sounds wonderful.
That's not that much better than the market did.
But minus 12%.
Yeah. So overall, did they do as well as the market? The answer is no. Now again, individual stocks obviously would do well. There are hundreds of biotech companies, anywhere from your top 15, 20, which are fairly large companies. You're investing in the healthcare industry, because your larger biotechs like Amgen and people like that are very, very large established firms. At the same time, there are little hot ones. Well, if you have some hot tip and you want to buy it, or you talk to your broker, he's got something he's recommending. But overall, it's a category of investment in healthcare, which over the time will probably do okay. But to say that it's going to be a superstar, the ability to pick those, they're winners and losers.
Mm-hmm. And here, the second part of the question, where the viewer asks you which biotechnology stocks you might recommend, we have tried to emphasize on our show, and you have emphasized several times, that you will not put yourself out to recommend individual stocks to anyone. That's not the purpose of this show.
That is correct. You should talk to a financial advisor on specifics. Like basically, is it a category that has some interest? Yes, it does. As I say, there are a lot of ETFs, and there's obviously way more. There's hundreds of biotech companies. Mm-hmm. But talk to your financial advisor.
Okay. Third question that we have today, Ed, is the individual writes, I have recently inherited a large collection of stamps and coins. Will their value continue to increase over time, or should I sell them now? What do you think that their future value might be?
Overall, first of all, you should get them appraised and see really what is its value today.
Where would a person go to get a stamp or a coin collection appraised, Ed?
Well, that you would have to look up, very frankly, and get a authorized coin dealer, and there are, offhand,
Probably they're all over the country.
Yeah, they're all over the country. In the same way, there are stamp dealers, and they would give you an appraisal. You may want to get it from more than one to get some idea. And I think talking to them would give you an idea, well, is this an unusual collection or is it an average collection? If it's an average collection, it won't particularly appreciate, I don't think. It's like an antique car. If you have a very unusual antique car, it may appreciate in value substantially. If it's just a regular antique car, it will appreciate to a limited point. So I really think that do you enjoy it? Do you want to keep it? If you're doing it just as an investment, I would say probably it will not particularly appreciate any great amount, unless it isn't very unusual. If there are some items in there that the guy says, yes, that's a really neat stamp, or that is an extremely well minted, of a relatively uncommon coin, yes, then it would appreciate.
I used to teach at Lake Superior State University in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and one of the individuals I taught with was actually from Philadelphia. He inherited a coin collection from his father, and when he was investigated it a little bit, he found, lo and behold, one of the coins was worth $50,000. He was quite surprised, but pleased. So these things can.
That's right. I mean, there are definitely individual coins that have, because of their scarcity and because of their quality, and the same say with stamps, could be quite valuable and could become more valuable. But generally speaking, value is based on quality and scarcity.
Okay. Well, number 4, a viewer writes, there are several stock exchanges across the world. We hear about Tokyo, we hear about London, New York. What are the differences among the stock exchanges, and which one of them has the highest returns for its investors over time? Which one do you think I should use?
Well, first of all, I would have to say to you, which one could you find a broker that would be registered? A broker must basically pay a fee to be able to trade in that exchange. So therefore, in America, except for the Toronto Exchange in Canada, I would say most brokerage firms don't particularly trade other than American exchanges. And very frankly, there's no such thing as a return on a stock exchange. It's individual stocks that are on that exchange. I looked at, there's I think 37,000 different stocks in the country traded on the major exchanges. And there are hundreds and hundreds of exchanges. Now, again, they're dependent on your list. There's 19 to 47 different exchanges, but there's really only $19.5 billion in capital.
I think this is surprising to the average person and to the beginning investor to realize that there's an exchange in just about every country in the world.
Yes, there is. In fact, in quite a few countries, even some small ones, they have more than one exchange. I was surprised myself, very frankly, when I started doing the research. But Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Libya, Ghana, I mean, all these little countries have an exchange. I don't think you'd want to exchange on them because the spread would be bad, the credibility would be questionable, and so on. So overall, if you want to buy stocks, I would think you would either buy in I would say the top 3, which would be the American or New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, and the Toronto. Okay. Beyond that, you start to, it would get quite complicated.
Okay. Well, number 5, would you please explain quantitative investing to our viewers? This one viewer is looking for more information about it and how it works and whether or not they should use it or not.
Well, first of all, if you were going to do quantitative investing, you would be doing it again through an ETF. That for you to personally do it, it is a very sophisticated, mathematical driven algorithms and all the other good stuff in this modern world. And some funds have done very well. More people are starting to do it, more sophisticated firms that sell the product, so that their returns actually, if you check them out, there's been some winners, there's been some losers. It's another method of investing. I must admit I've never used it. I don't have that much knowledge of it. It appears that
This is something that the individual investor really can't do on their own.
Let's put it this: unless they're extremely sophisticated, the answer is no.
This is something that you need to go to a brokerage and see if they have a model that they use.
Well, again, an
this.
ETF, an exchange traded fund, somebody that's what they're using, and you may find that someone says, look, 25% of the stocks in my fund are quantitative through analysis. The others are not. And there are some funds that are just, but they aren't very large, and they haven't really, at times they've done well, but overall they're not, I can't say this is really a great area you want to go into.
Okay. Well, number 6, what steps should we take to shield as much of our family's wealth as possible from government taxation when my wife and I pass?
Well, first of all, unless you have an estate, and there's only 2,000 families in the United States do, that's over $11 million, there is no federal income tax. So there's nothing to shield. And in this case, if you're a Pennsylvania resident, if you're talking about your direct descendants, it's only a 4.5% tax. So that's really
so there is state tax to worry about.
There's a state tax, but at 4.5%, that's a pretty small number. And if it's other siblings, it's 12%, and then the maximum tax in Pennsylvania is 15%. These are not giant taxes, considering the fact that you have the cost to do all this work. So overall, I would say now with the new laws changed, there's really nothing you have to. You want to plan what you want to do, and don't worry about taxes.
Oh, okay. Well, number 7, Mr. Arnold. I'm confused on what approach to take to cybercurrency. The viewer writes, first I ignored it, then I believed I was missing many solid opportunities to invest. Now those opportunities seem to disappear and diminish. What do you believe cybercurrency's future is, and how should I approach it in my investing plans?
Very frankly, Charlie, the cybercurrency is a high-risk investment. Do I think it has potential? But at the same time, right now, there are hundreds of cyber currencies. Eventually,
most people realize that, Ed.
Yeah, I don't think so. We tend to think always it's Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin is the grandfather, and that's sort of the basic coin. And in fact, when you do a lot of buying, you have to buy a Bitcoin and then swap for another coin. So it's somewhat complicated. That basically, if you were living in an unstable country like a Venezuela or Argentina or Zimbabwe or something, you absolutely would probably be owning it, because your own currency isn't any good, and it's even restricted what you can do in dollars. So to say a small part of your portfolio you couldn't have it in, look at something that's long term, you go in it, you just hold it, and don't look at the ups and downs. Obviously, many of them have gone up literally 100-fold, and now they've dropped 90% of that value. And some are actually, a fair number are below what they were a year ago. But if you would have bought them originally, they're still probably up pretty well, and some of them aren't up at all. So it's a little bit like if you were investing in car companies at the turn of the 1900. Yes, some car companies you'd have done extremely well. Most of them, you'd have lost your money. I think cyber currencies, you could say that too. But if you stuck with the popular ones, will they do well? It's a gamble, and it's really hard to say.
Okay, well, on that note, we've run out of time. We have to invite you back for another Arnold Report. When you viewers send us more inquiries, we'll be looking for them, and we'll be looking for you next week on Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.